Have you ever been silenced so cruelly that it felt like your voice had been ripped from you? I have, and it wasn't by a stranger on the street, nor by someone who didn't know me. It was by my own son. He took my phone from my hand, looked me in the eye with a look of contempt, and said, "Old women have nothing to talk about with anyone." Those words echoed in my mind like a punch. I was paralyzed, as if in that moment my entire life had been erased. As if all the wisdom, all the history, all the love I'd carried over decades had lost its value overnight. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like the one who should have listened to you most was the one who silenced you? In that moment, I felt the weight of loneliness. It wasn't just my phone he'd taken from me. It was my voice. It was the chance to connect, to be heard, to share my memories, my advice, my pain, and my joy. It was as if he'd told the whole world, her story doesn't matter. She doesn't matter. And believe me, that feeling of invisibility is devastating. I stood there, silent, holding back tears, trying not to break down. But inside me, something screamed. A part of me refused to accept that fate of being forgotten, silenced, erased. You know, all my life I've told stories, family stories, stories of overcoming obstacles, stories that touched the hearts of those who listened. I've always believed that real stories from grandmas had the power to transform, to teach, to heal. I'd always heard that the wisdom of the elders was something no one could take away from us. But there, faced with my son's cold gaze, I felt as if I'd lost even that. It was as if the world had decided I had nothing more useful to offer. As I held the pain in my chest, flashes of my life began to flash through my mind. How much I had sacrificed to raise my children, how much I had set aside my dreams so they could achieve theirs. Every sleepless night, every hidden tear, every silent surrender. And in the end, was this what I got in return? To be treated like a burden, like someone who no longer had a voice. I wondered, do all mothers reach this point? Can all the love of a lifetime be forgotten so easily? This humiliation wasn't just an insult. It was as if it had opened an old wound. That wound of invisibility that so many women feel as they reach old age. The feeling that you're no longer missed, that your words no longer have value, that your presence doesn't change anything. But the truth is that stories that touch the heart don't die. They can be forgotten for a time, they can be stifled, but at some point they find a way to rise again. I remember looking at that phone in his hands and feeling like the world had closed a door on me. But at the same time, deep down, another door was beginning to open. I didn't know how yet, but something told me my voice wasn't over yet, that, somehow, I would prove that even in old age, it's still possible to be heard, still possible to inspire, still possible to be strong. And it was precisely in that moment of silence and pain that everything began to change. I didn't yet know where it would lead me, but I knew I wouldn't remain silent, because those who have truth within themselves always find a way to make noise. But to understand why this hurts so much, I need to go back in time a little. My name is Betty. I'm 72 years old. I've always been a talkative woman, full of stories, advice, and jokes. My friends used to say I had the gift of gab, that every time I told an episode from my life, people stopped to listen, as if it were a scene from a movie. And I believed it, believed that my voice was my strength, my way of leaving a mark on the world. For many years, I was the center of the dinner table, the one who made everyone laugh after a hard day, the one who recalled stories from my children's childhood, the behind-the-scenes stories of when we were poorer, the struggles to pay the bills, the small miracles that kept us going. My life, before all this, was simple. I would wake up early, make coffee, tidy the house, and go to work. I always came back tired, but happy to have given my best to raising my family. I was proud of the decisions I made, even when they cost me dearly. I often gave up my own dreams to invest in theirs, and you know, I never regretted it, because I believed that was a mother's role, to silently sacrifice herself, to see her children thrive. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was all worth it. But then, the next day, their smiles would make me forget any pain. It was as if every sacrifice was compensated by the simple fact of seeing them well. This was the fuel for my journey, what kept me going. I saw myself as a strong woman who knew how to transform difficulties into learning experiences. Often, when someone asked me how I endured so much, I would reply, "Life teaches us, even when we don't want to learn." This was my mindset, my way of facing the ups and downs, and, for a long time, I lived believing that my dedication would be remembered, that my efforts would not be in vain. I believed there was a hidden truth in life, that a mother's love would always be recognized, that one day, my children would look back and realize that everything they achieved had my hands holding the foundation. But this revelation never came. Instead, as time passed, I felt as if my stories had lost their luster, as if I had become just a background presence, an object in the corner of the room. The conversations dwindled. At first, they were just interruptions. "Mom, not now." Then came the impatient looks, as if my every word were a nuisance. Until, little by little, silence became the norm. I, who had always been full of life, full of stories that touched the heart, began to withdraw. It's strange how we change when we realize we no longer have space. It's as if a part of us is slowly being erased without anyone noticing. But deep inside me, memories still lingered. I remembered nights when, tired after a long day, I still found the strength to tell my children stories of hope, stories that, in some way, shaped who they are today. And each memory was accompanied by a mixture of pride and pain. Pride for having been part of building their lives, pain for being forgotten in the process. I've always been seen as the woman with a joke on the tip of her tongue, who could turn even tragedy into something bearable. But the truth is, when the laughter fades and no one pays attention anymore, the silence weighs like a sentence. And that's exactly what I felt, a silent condemnation, as if my phase was over. Have you ever felt this way? As if the world had decided your voice no longer had a place. It's a cruel feeling, as if your entire journey were just a disposable chapter. And it's precisely at this point that pain mixes with a will to resist. Because deep down, I knew my story still mattered, that there was an impact on what I experienced, that my scars carried lessons that could not be erased. And even as I began to live in silence, something inside me remained restless. It was as if a forgotten part of my soul insisted on reminding me who I truly was. I wasn't just an invisible woman. I was someone who had weathered storms, made difficult decisions, endured humiliations, and still remained standing. This certainty, still timid, began to grow within me, a small flame, but impossible to extinguish, because, even if they tried to silence me, life always finds a way to reveal its own truth. And this flame would, little by little, lead me to something I could never have imagined. Tommy, my son, started saying I was getting in the way, that I talked too much. At first, they were just random comments, almost disguised as jokes. "Mom, you talk so much, no one can pay attention." I forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt, like someone who hears a poorly told joke and tries to move on. But inside, each word he said was like a small fissure opening up inside me. Over time, these fissures became walls. Invisible, cold walls, erected inside our own home. Until they completely separated the space where I existed from the space where he lived. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase. That maybe it was the stress of work, the rush of adult life, the pressures he couldn't handle. But when the words repeat themselves, when the criticism becomes routine, we realize it's not just carelessness, it's devaluation. It's as if, little by little, I'd stopped being the mother who cared, guided, and protected, and had become nothing more than an annoying voice, a background noise that needed to be silenced. It's cruel to realize this. You spend your life believing you're your family's safe haven, and suddenly you feel like you've become a burden. Every impatient look, every heavy sigh, every clipped sentence becomes a painful memory. And with each passing day, I felt myself diminishing. I, whose mind had always been full of stories, advice, and memories, began to grow silent. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible, but deep inside, the impact was devastating. Behind the scenes of family life, I was the same woman as always. I woke up early, made coffee, and tidied the house. But inside, a hidden truth tormented me. I was no longer heard. And this is the worst loneliness. Being surrounded by people and yet not existing for them. I wondered, had all my sacrifice become mere disposable memories? Had my voice no longer mattered? Over time, I realized it wasn't just his words that hurt. It was his lack of interest, his haste to interrupt me, the way he looked away when I tried to talk. He didn't need to raise his voice to hurt me. His silence was enough. His silence said more than any insult. And I, trying to maintain my dignity, withdrew more and more. I knew this journey was taking me to a dangerous place: invisibility, the mindset of someone who comes to believe they have nothing left to offer. But there was something inside me that resisted, a small but living spark. I told myself that stories that touch the heart never die, that there are revelations hidden in every pain, that even humiliation carries a hidden lesson. Still, his decisions left their mark on me. The way he said I talked too much, as if my words were just noise, made me doubt myself. I, who had always been known for giving good advice, began to wonder if I hadn't truly lost my value. That's how devaluation works. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, like water seeping through cracks and weakening the structure. Until, suddenly, you look at yourself and no longer recognize yourself. And it was in this silent process that I began to realize something even deeper. There was a hidden truth behind that indifference. It wasn't just about me, it was about him too. Tommy carried within himself an impatience that perhaps stemmed from his own frustrations, his own inability to cope with life. But instead of facing his conflicts, he vented them on me, and I became an easy target. His words hurt me, but they also awakened me. It was as if, with each comment, life was pushing me toward a revelation I couldn't yet fully grasp. I pretended not to hear, trying to shield my heart, but deep down I already knew this path was about to reach a breaking point. I held back the pain, swallowed my tears, told myself there was no point in arguing, until the final blow came. He took my phone from my hand. The gesture was quick, cold, without any hesitation. I stared at him, trying to understand what was happening, as if, for a moment, my own son had become a stranger before me. "You have no one to talk to," he said, his tone a mix of impatience and contempt. "An old woman shouldn't expose herself online." These words hammered inside my head, as if each syllable were a brick stacked on top of my chest. It was at that moment that I realized it wasn't just my phone he was taking from me. He was ripping away my voice, my right to exist beyond the walls of our home. I held back the tears as long as I could, but there was no hiding the pain. When I finally found myself alone, I broke down. I cried silently, trying to stifle my sobs, so no one would hear me. I cried because I understood, once and for all, that to him I was no longer a person with stories, dreams, and desires. I had become just an uncomfortable presence, someone who talked too much, who needed to be silenced. It's difficult to explain the impact of such humiliation. It's not just what's said, but what's implied. The message was clear. My life had lost value. My word no longer mattered. It's as if the entire society had found a spokesperson within my own family. Someone who said out loud what so many think silently, that old people have no place, that their wisdom is outdated, that it's best to leave them alone in a corner. That moment, I felt a transformation taking place within me. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't a burst of courage, it was an open wound, burning and aching. But it also revealed a hidden truth. I couldn't continue living like this, in a state of oblivion. This experience showed me how cruel the mindset many people have about old age is, as if reaching 70 were synonymous with the end, with uselessness, with silence. I remembered so many nights I'd stayed awake waiting for a call, a message, any sign that someone still wanted to hear my voice. I remembered the times I'd saved up beautiful, funny, and revealing stories about my youth, waiting for the right moment to share them, only to never be told because no one seemed to have time to listen. All of this came flooding back when I saw that phone snatched from my hand. It wasn't just about technology, social media, or posting a photo. It was about dignity. It was about the right to exist fully, to still have an impact on the world, even if only in a small way. Because life doesn't lose its meaning just because we get older. The journey doesn't end when our hair turns gray. On the contrary, it's at this stage that we have more stories, more behind the scenes to reveal, more decisions that shaped who we are and that could inspire those who come after. And yet, there I was, reduced to nothing. As if my memories were nothing but dust, as if my voice were just a noise that needed to be muffled. This was the hardest blow, realizing that my own son, the one for whom I had sacrificed so much, no longer saw any value in me. This realization tore me apart. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever experienced the pain of being treated as invisible by those who should be the first to recognize you? It's a kind of loneliness that has no comparison, because it's not just being physically alone, It's being alone even when someone is by your side. It's hearing the right words, but feeling in the tone, in the look, that there's no longer any respect, that there's no longer any space for you. As I cried, something inside me began to shift. It was as if each tear washed away not only the pain, but also the illusion I carried of still being seen as I had been before. The humiliation exposed an old wound, but it also ignited a new flame. I didn't know exactly how, but I felt I needed to find a way to show that I still had a voice, that I still had the truth, that there was still so much inside me that no one could erase. And that flame, still timid, began to grow each day, a silent force that, even in the pain, told me the story wasn't over. That, behind that humiliation, there was a calling, an invitation to look at myself differently. I could no longer simply be a spectator of my own life. I needed, somehow, to reclaim what had been ripped from me. And it was in this heavy silence, in this emptiness that seemed to have no way out, that something unexpected began to happen. Without a cell phone, I just stared out the window, as if that piece of glass were my only connection to the outside world. Each morning began the same way, me sitting in the armchair, staring at the street, waiting to see some movement, anything that would remind me I was still a part of life. It was as if time had stopped. The silence in the house was so dense, it seemed to swallow me, and I felt increasingly erased, as if my existence were slowly dissolving. I never imagined such a small object could carry so much meaning. My cell phone wasn't just a device, it was my bridge to people, my way of hearing voices, sharing memories, and feeling present in a world that never stops. When it was taken away from me, I didn't just lose access to calls and messages, I lost a part of my identity. I felt like someone pushed out of a lively party, condemned to watch from afar, on the sidelines, in complete silence. And this silence was cruel, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had so much stories, advice, memories that could make a difference. I held within me experiences that could inspire, warn, console, but without that channel of communication, it felt like everything had been stifled. It was like having an entire library in your house and not being able to open the doors to anyone. As the days passed, the loneliness began to change me. At first, I thought I would get used to it, that time would pass, and perhaps the pain would lessen, but the impact was the opposite. Every hour without speaking to someone increased the weight on my chest. I began to question my worth, to wonder if I truly had anything that mattered. This kind of isolation is treacherous, because it's not just the lack of physical companionship, but the feeling of being forgotten, discarded. There were times when I felt a kind of emotional numbness. I saw myself standing at the window, staring into the void, as if there were no future. But at the same time, a part of me screamed at me not to accept that reality. This was the struggle within me, between the apathy that urged me to give up and the inner voice that told me there was still something greater waiting for me. I knew I couldn't continue with that defeatist mindset. It was as if life was testing me, showing me the hidden truth of a world that prefers to silence the elderly rather than listen to what they have to say. This revelation was painful, but it also opened my eyes. If I wanted to be remembered, if I wanted to make an impact, I could no longer wait for others to come to me. I would need to find a new way to rise up. Still, the process wasn't easy. There were days when I felt trapped inside my own home, as if I were serving an invisible sentence. I remembered when I was younger, how life seemed full of decisions and paths, and now I felt trapped, without a choice. But deep down, I knew that every journey has its unexpected twists and turns, and that, often, it's in the deepest silence that the most important revelations emerge. I tried to distract myself with simple tasks, tidying my room, watering the plants, looking through old photos. Each image brought back vivid memories that screamed not to be forgotten. And it was in these memories that I began to find a spark of hope, because if the world insisted on silencing me, perhaps it was time to discover new ways to make my voice echo. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. God always sends signs. Sometimes they arrive subtly, in small details, in unexpected encounters, in words spoken at just the right moment. And even in that period of silence and isolation, I began to sense that something was about to happen, something that would completely transform the way I saw my own story. And it was exactly at this point that the unexpected entered the scene. My neighbor Sarah was only 19, but she seemed to carry a rare curiosity in her eyes. almost as if she could see beyond the surface. One day, while I was watering my plants, she approached me with a smile and asked me a question that echoed within me. "Betty, why don't you ever come online? You'd have so much to teach me." I froze for a few seconds. It wasn't just innocent curiosity. That sentence had the power of a revelation. Suddenly, all the silence I'd been carrying inside was pierced by a ray of light. I realized something that, until then, had seemed impossible. My voice still had value. That girl, who could easily have ignored me like so many others, saw something in me that had been forgotten. It was as if the universe had chosen someone unlikely to remind me of who I truly was. I smiled shyly, trying to hide my emotion, but inside, I felt a transformation begin to unfold. Sarah didn't know it, but she had planted a seed within me. It was as if she had given me back a piece of my identity that I thought I'd lost forever. For the first time in a long time, I felt like there was still a journey ahead of me, that I wasn't doomed to oblivion. In that moment, I remembered all the nights I cried in silence, believing no one wanted to hear me. I remembered the day Tommy snatched my cell phone from my hand, as if he could also rip away my right to exist. And now, before me, stood a young woman who, in so many words, reminded me of a hidden truth, that the knowledge we accumulate, the stories we live, cannot be silenced. They always find a way to reappear. The impact of that question was far greater than Sarah could have imagined. I went back inside and stared at myself in the mirror, staring at my own reflection. I saw the marks on my face, the wrinkles that held memories, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see myself as a burden. I saw myself as a book full of chapters, yet unread by those who needed those stories. And that thought gave me a quiet strength. Sarah made me realize something essential, that transformation doesn't begin from the outside in, but from the inside out. I could spend years waiting for my son to recognize me, for society to give me a space, for the people around me to finally see the value of my voice. But maybe the decision was in my hands. Maybe I needed to choose to lift my head up again and show that I still had something to offer. I didn't know exactly how to do this. There was still fear, insecurity, that feeling of being out of time, as if technology were forbidden territory for someone my age. But at the same time, there was a flame within me that was beginning to grow. It was as if Sarah's every word had become fuel. The revelation was there. I didn't need permission to exist. I just needed to allow myself. I spent that night awake, pondering the possibilities. I remembered stories I'd never told, moments that could inspire not only my neighbor but so many others. I thought about the loneliness of so many women like me who had also been silenced within their own homes, and I felt that perhaps my voice could become theirs too. This idea left me uneasy, as if a door had opened and I could no longer ignore it. The next morning, when I saw Sarah again, I could tell she was waiting for my answer. I hesitated, but deep down, I had already made a decision. I would find a way to express myself, to reclaim what had been stolen from me. It wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't turn back, because, in that moment, I knew my story still had an impact. And so it was that, without realizing it, I began a path that would change not only my life, but also the way so many others would see the hidden strength behind silence. And this path began precisely with the courage to accept that my voice deserved to be heard. I thought about that conversation with Sarah for a long time. It was curious how so few words could awaken in me a strength I no longer believed existed. And, at the same time that this revelation brought me hope, it also brought me indignation. Because it wasn't just my story. I knew that many other women, many other men too, had been in similar situations. People who had been silenced, diminished, treated as if they had nothing left to offer simply because they had grown older. And perhaps that's why I'm sharing all of this with you, because deep down, I believe that stories have power when they're spoken out loud, when they stop being hidden secrets and resonate with those who listen. That's why I want to ask you something very simple. If any part of this story has ever revolted you, if it reminded you of something you've experienced or witnessed, leave a comment below about what bothered you most. Sometimes, what you write can become exactly what someone else needs to read to avoid feeling alone. And if you feel this kind of story matters, that it needs to be told and heard by more people, then like this video. It may seem small, but each like helps the message reach more people who also need to remember they still have a voice. It's a way to ensure these stories don't remain trapped in silence, but find space to touch other hearts. And if you want to, continue following this journey. If you don't want to miss the next stories that reveal these hidden truths of life, subscribe to the channel. I say this sincerely. Your participation is what makes this space exist. It's not just a number, it's proof that this conversation has value, that I'm not speaking alone, that there's still a community willing to listen and share, because, ultimately, every comment, every like, and every subscription are ways to show that these stories still matter. And, for me, there's nothing more valuable than knowing that my voice is heard, that it makes an impact, and that, somehow, we're all connected in this same quest for recognition and dignity. And it was precisely with this feeling that I began to see that the silence that suffocated me would not be eternal. Something was moving inside me, a transformation that I could no longer ignore. I borrowed Sarah's phone with trembling hands. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I just felt a sense of urgency inside me, as if this were my only chance to regain everything that had been taken from me. I opened the camera, stared at my own reflection on the screen, and for a second I almost gave up. My son's voice still echoed inside me. "Old lady, there's nothing to talk about with anyone." But in that moment, I decided he was no longer the one to define the value of my voice. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. The image appeared, live, and at first, there were only one or two connected glances. I considered ending it, but something inside me said, "Keep going." So I began speaking. Not with rehearsed speeches, not with pretty phrases, but with the raw truth, the kind born of pain. I spoke about the humiliation of having my phone snatched away, about the feeling of being erased in my own home, about the impact of being treated as if invisible. And as I spoke, the screen began to fill with names, with people stopping to listen. Within minutes, there were hundreds. Comments rolled in, one after another. That could be my mother. My grandmother went through the same thing. "I'm crying with you." Each word that appeared on the screen was like a hug spanning the distance, as if those people were holding my hand and saying, "We're here, we hear you." And it was at that moment that the revelation came. I was never alone. The transformation that took place within me in that instant was indescribable. That feeling of being erased gave way to something new, almost impossible to explain. I felt my voice, previously silenced, now echo in dozens, then hundreds, and soon thousands of hearts. It was as if every tear I'd shed in silence had finally found meaning, as if the suffering had not been in vain. The live stream continued, and I opened the drawers of my memory. I told old stories, behind-the-scenes moments of my life that I'd never shared before. I talked about the journey of becoming a mother, the difficult decisions, the sacrifices that shaped who I am today. I spoke of the sleepless nights, the hidden fears, the times I thought about giving up, but kept standing. And with each revelation, I saw more people connecting, crying, sending messages of support. I read phrases like, "You are the voice my mother didn't have the courage to be. Thank you for speaking what so many of us feel." And that's when I realized something even more profound. It wasn't just about me. My story was, in a way, the story of many. I carried in my chest the pain of an entire generation that was taught to remain silent, to accept, to believe that after a certain age there was no more room for dreams or impact. But by sharing my truth, I was breaking that cycle. I was showing that it was still possible to transform pain into strength, silence into echo, invisibility into presence. Amidst so many comments, one left a lasting mark on me. "Ms. Betty, you don't know it, but you saved my life today. I was thinking about giving up, but hearing your voice made me realize I still have value." I cried again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief, from gratitude, from feeling that my impulsive decision had become a beacon for someone who was on the brink of the abyss. At that moment, I understood that a shift in power had occurred. What had previously been control and silencing was now transformed into freedom and presence. The cell phone, which had been a symbol of humiliation, became an instrument of healing. The live stream wasn't just a broadcast, it was an act of resistance, a silent scream that became a collective chorus. And as I spoke, something inside me reorganized. It wasn't just about reclaiming my voice, but about rediscovering my identity. Each comment was proof that the truth always finds a way, even when it's stifled. The revelation was clear. Those who have the courage to expose themselves find strength not only within themselves, but in their connection with others. I ended that night a different woman than the woman I'd started it. There was a new spark in me, a confidence I thought I'd lost forever. And even though I knew there were still challenges, that I would still face scornful looks and harsh words, I wasn't the same. I had seen the impact of my voice. I had felt the strength of the community forming around me, and that morning, lying in bed unable to sleep, I thought, if a simple live stream could move so many people, what else could happen if I decided to continue? The answer was just beginning to take shape. My son tried to silence me, but it was precisely in that forced silence that I found the greatest strength of my life. It's strange to think about it, because the pain of being silenced was still raw within me, but at the same time, something had shifted. The humiliation that had previously crushed me now became fuel. The live stream I'd made, that seemingly small decision, crossed boundaries I could never have imagined. Within days, thousands of people had shared my words. My voice, which he'd tried to silence at home, now echoed throughout the world. And that was the true revelation. The strength we so often seek in the recognition of those closest to us sometimes manifests itself where we least expect it. It wasn't my son who validated my importance. It was strangers, people who had never seen me but who felt every word I said deep down. And this showed me that the truth doesn't depend on those who try to silence it. The truth always finds a way, no matter how unlikely it may seem. I started receiving messages from all sides. People shared their own stories of abandonment, ingratitude, and silencing. People who wrote, "You spoke for me. Your journey is mine too. Now I no longer feel alone." Each of these messages hit me like a wave of emotional impact, showing me that this wasn't just about me. I had become part of something bigger, an invisible chain connecting people who, until then, had believed themselves isolated in their pain. It's curious how life works behind the scenes. We often think that the greatest transformations will come from the outside, from major events, from grand gestures, but deep down, it's the small decisions, the ones we make almost without realizing it, that change everything. I didn't plan to start a movement. I didn't plan to be a voice for anyone. I just wanted to vent. I wanted to free myself from that invisible prison, but in doing so, I ended up opening a door to thousands of other voices that were previously locked away, and it was at that point that I realized the existence of a kind of divine justice. Because when someone tries to erase you, when someone believes they can silence your story, that's exactly when the universe finds a way to amplify what you carry. My son believed that by snatching my phone from my hands, he would have control. But what he didn't know is that this act would become the trigger for a much greater revelation. No one can imprison a truth that needs to be told. The live stream reached a level I never could have predicted. People began sharing it on pages, groups, and channels, and with each share, my voice found new ears, new hearts. I read comments from grandchildren who said they were going to call their grandmothers that very day. I read children confessing that they had never truly listened to their mothers. I read women who said, "After listening to you, I promised myself I would never be silent again." This showed me the true impact of what had happened. It wasn't just about being heard. It was about raising awareness, provoking transformation, and the more I watched this wave spread, the more I felt an invisible hand guiding it all. It was as if the silence that suffocated me had become an echo, and not just any echo, but one that spanned generations, making people reflect on their own decisions, on how they treat those who raised them, on the hidden truth that many prefer to ignore. Inside me, I felt both relief and outrage. Relief at realizing there was still room for me in the world, that my story hadn't been in vain. Outrage at understanding that I had to be humiliated, silenced, and diminished for this voice to gain the strength it deserved. But perhaps that was precisely what made it all so powerful. The contrast between pain and liberation. I won't deny it. There were still open wounds, still hurt from what I'd experienced inside my own home. But now, every time I thought about those lonely tears, I also remembered the thousands of messages I'd received. It was as if each one said, "We hear you, we believe you," and that feeling was priceless. It was then that I understood that divine justice doesn't always come when we expect it, but it does, and when it arrives, no one can stop it. What was silence became sound, what was pain became hope, what was loneliness became community. And, contradictory as it may seem, it was the attempt to silence myself that ended up multiplying my voice. And as that wave grew, I knew there was something even bigger to come. because life always has moments when we have to face head-on what we've been trying to avoid. And I had a feeling I was about to experience just that. When Tommy saw the repercussions of it all, it was as if the ground had dropped beneath him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control of the narrative. People were commenting, sharing, crying with me, and suddenly the house was full of voices that echoed beyond the walls he'd tried to build in silence. He was embarrassed, and I could see it in his eyes, in the disconcerted way he stared at me. There was a mixture of surprise, fear, and a certain belated regret. He leaned closer and, in a low voice, said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Those words, which I'd so often dreamed of hearing, didn't have the effect he'd hoped for at that moment. Not because I didn't want forgiveness, but because I knew the request wasn't just about me. It was about him, about his image in the world, about the public revelation of what had previously been hidden behind the scenes of our lives. The truth had escaped, and now everyone could see it. I looked him straight in the eye and replied, "You tried to silence me, but those who have truth don't need to shout. Life makes noise for us." In that moment, there was no hatred in my heart, but a clarity I had never felt before. I understood that the law of return is not just about punishment, but about learning. Tommy was facing the natural consequences of the decisions he made. It was as if the impact of what he had done had returned to him multiplied, exposing not only his actions but also hidden truths that had been buried for so long. I saw in his eyes a lost boy, someone who had forgotten the journey we'd traveled together, who had erased from memory the sacrifices I'd made so he could have opportunities. And now, faced with the repercussions, it all came flooding back. He could no longer deny it, could no longer hide it. Life had held a mirror up to him, and that reflection wasn't easy to face. For me, it was a silent transformation. I no longer needed to raise my voice to be heard. I didn't need long explanations or justifications. The strength lay precisely in maintaining my dignity, in showing that truth carries its own weight, that it doesn't depend on shouting, but on consistency. And in that moment, I realized the power had shifted. The control he believed he had over me was gone. I was no longer the woman who cried in secret. I was the woman who had found her voice. It's strange how life sometimes prepares these scenarios where the roles are reversed. I, who so often asked simply to be heard, now had the whole world listening, and he, who believed he had the right to silence me, found himself obliged to listen. This reversal came not with resentment, but with an unexpected serenity. It was as if divine justice had acted in a way I could never have planned. The law of return is this: it doesn't warn, it doesn't choose its timing, but it arrives. And when it arrives, there's no escaping it. I didn't need to point out mistakes. I didn't need to accuse. I just had to live my truth, share my pain, and life itself took charge of showing the weight of choices. And perhaps this was the greatest revelation of all. There's no way to silence forever that which carries authenticity. As he apologized, I felt a mixture of compassion and determination. Compassion, because he was my son, and no mother wants to see her child shamed. Determination, because I knew I could no longer allow that mindset to imprison me. The journey I had begun could not be stopped. The impact of my voice had already broken barriers, and now I carried the responsibility to continue. Tommy lowered his head, and I realized that, perhaps for the first time, he was truly reflecting. It was as if life had shown him, without needing to lecture, what it means to despise the one who gave you everything. I don't know what was going through his mind at that moment, but I sensed that scene would remain etched in his memory, like a scar that would remind him, every day, of the consequences of his decisions. And I silently understood that this was just another stage of my journey, because justice hadn't ended there. Life, with its mysterious ways, still had more to reveal, and I knew that, after that moral confrontation, other revelations were about to emerge. Today, I continue telling stories, not because I need attention, nor because I want to prove anything to anyone, but because I discovered that my voice doesn't belong to me alone. It bears the scars of a lifetime, of costly decisions, of sacrifices that shaped paths, of behind-the-scenes moments no one has ever seen. Every wrinkle on my face is a paragraph, every scar is a revelation, and every memory is a hidden truth that cannot be erased. I learned that even silence speaks, and that pain, when transformed into words, can become the echo that awakens other voices. The greatest transformation I've experienced wasn't having thousands of people listen to me, but realizing that this strength has always existed within me, dormant, waiting to be called upon. My son tried to silence me. Loneliness almost convinced me I was worthless, but life found a way to show me that, even when all seems lost, our stories still have an impact. This is the mindset I've chosen to adopt now. No longer living in hiding, no longer accepting that my journey is over. I carry on, and I carry on loudly. And perhaps that's what I want to leave you, listening. Even if they've tried to erase you, even if they've said you have nothing more to offer, know this: there's a truth within you that no one can steal. Sometimes the world tries to convince us we've become small, but it's in these moments that we need to remember that the essence of who we are is greater than any humiliation. Those who have truth don't need to shout. Life, sooner or later, makes noise for us. If you've ever been silenced, if you've ever felt invisible, keep this in your heart. Your voice is stronger than you think. And don't be silent, because every time you speak, every time you share your story, someone, somewhere, recognizes themselves in you and finds the courage to not give up. This is the true impact of words. They don't die, they don't disappear, they don't get lost, they travel, they spread, and they touch where they need to. I chose to keep telling my stories, not because they're extraordinary, but because I know they're real. And real stories have a power that no lie can erase. They carry the authenticity of life, with its pains and triumphs, its falls and twists and turns. I continue because I believe every revelation has a purpose, and because I've learned that imposed silence is never the end, but merely the beginning of something greater. And so, even when everything seems quiet, even when loneliness tries to impose itself, I remind myself that those who carry the truth are never alone. There is always someone listening, always someone ready to connect with what you have to say. That's why I no longer keep quiet, because I discovered that the voice, when born from the heart, has the power to cross distances we can't even imagine. And as I continue on this journey, I know there's still much to come, because every time a story is told, it opens the door for others to emerge. And every time a voice is raised, it inspires others to do the same. I continue because I know this path still holds revelations that go far beyond what I can imagine. If you've made it this far with me, I want to truly thank you. This story only makes sense because there are people who listen, who connect, and who recognize in my words a piece of their own life. It's this exchange that keeps this space alive, full of meaning. If you feel this type of content deserves to continue, subscribe to the channel. This way, you won't miss future stories and help me continue sharing these truths that are so often hidden behind the scenes of life. And also leave your comment so I know you were with me until the end. Right? I'm with you until the end. I want to feel your presence in this space, because every word you say makes a difference. And if this conversation touched your heart at any point, please like the video. It's a simple gesture, but it shows we're all in this together. And since you're here, there's a video on the side that complements this message. Click and stay with me there.